We continue now at the top of Daf Chavdalad Amud Aleph and Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 24a. On the previous Amud, Rabbi Chanina said, if you have a situation where you can follow rov, meaning you can follow majority, or you can follow karov, that which is closer, so the halacha is holchen achar harov, we follow the majority. And the Gemara was in the middle of bringing a proof from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is talking about a case of two shovchos. You have to determine the owner of which one is the owner of this dove that is lost between the two dovecotes. And the Mishnah said you follow whichever one is closer. And so at first the Gemara said it's a proof because we're following what's closer, even if the other one is larger, so it sounds like we're actually following karov over rov. And the Gemara says, no, it could be that the Mishnah is talking specifically in a situation where they're both of equal size, but the Gemara still says, even if they're both of equal size, why don't we follow ruba di alma? We should say that it didn't come from either of them, because the majority are going to come from the outside. And the Gemara now answers, bishvil shel kramim. We're talking over here where it's like a path of a vineyard, because if it was true that this young dove came from somewhere in the outside, so if we're talking about here a young dove that's not able to fly, that's just hopping along, it could not have come. Because the general rule is, if you have a dove that's hopping along, as long as it's able to see its nest, so it will continue to hop. But if it can't see its nest anymore, it won't. The point is, this is essentially preventing it from coming from the outside. That's why we know it belongs to one of these two owners. Rashi explains, Bishvil shal kramim, again you have a path of vineyard, you have vines over here. The idea is that through the vineyards, it's able to be nadada, it's able to hop outside of 50. So in other words, it's able to, even though over here we have a situation of a young dove that's beyond 50 amos from its nest, which generally does not happen if it's hopping and it's not flying, but here it's possible because it's going to use the vineyards to go further. But nevertheless, we don't follow the majority of the whole world. We don't say it came from outside of these two shovachs. Because if you have an animal, if you have a dove that's hopping along, as long as it can still see its nest, it will continue. Otherwise it won't. So when it comes to this young dove, if it's coming from somewhere else, it won't be able to see its nest. Because the vineyards block the view, and so that's why a shvil shel kramim over here is going to be able to answer the question, and we have no proof to the issue again of rov of karov. It could be over here specifically, it makes sense to follow karov, but if you'd have rov and karov, you might follow rov. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya says, Afanon nami tanina, we learned the same idea in a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah from Meseches Nida, and Rashi explains, Afanon nami tanina Rabbi Chanina, we have a Mishnah like Rabbi Chanina, the rov v'karov, halach achar harov, that if you have majority and you have something nearby, you follow the majority. And the Mishnah Nida says, Dam shenimtza beprosdor, let's say you have blood that is found in the corridor. The idea over here is you're trying to determine whether this is dam nida or not. And so the Mishnah says, Sveiko Tameh, in this case, it's a case of doubt, but we say that it's Tameh Shechez Kaso, because the presumption is, Min HaMakor, that this blood is coming from the source, meaning it's coming from the uterus. Essentially, the presumption is that this is Dam Nida. V'afagav de'iko aliyah de mekarven. The Gemara says that's true, even though there is what we call the upper chamber, so to speak, where the blood is closer, and that blood would actually be tar. But apparently we say since the majority of the blood comes from the Makor, so we're following rov. You see over here that you follow rov, and you don't follow karov, you follow the majority, and you don't follow what is nearby. And the Gemara says, Amar le Rava, Rava says back to him, he says back to Abaya, that's not really a proof, because rov u'matzoi ka'amr, you're bringing a proof from a case where it's not only majority, meaning not only does the majority of the blood come from the makor, but also it more frequently comes. So you have a situation of both rov and matzoi. Rov u'matzoi lekalaman damar. If you have rov and matzoi, nobody would argue. Certainly over there you would follow the rov and matzoi, so there's no real proof from this Mishnah in Nida that you would follow rov over karov in a typical case. The Tani Rabbi Chia, because Rabbi Chia taught with regards to this halacha, dam hanimtza beprosder, when it comes to the blood that's found in the corridor, we are so certain that that blood is dam nida, and we say chayav and olav al bias mikdash. You're even chayiv if you enter the Beis HaMikdash with that kind of tumah, and similarly v'sorf and olav is truma. Let's say somebody with that kind of tumah touches truma, you would burn the truma. In other words, it's a real certainty. It's a real certainty that is dam nida. And the Gemara says further, v'yamar Rava, and Rava says. The Bach changes the girsa slightly to Amar Rava. Rava says, Shma'ami nami de Rabbi Chia. You see from Rabbi Chia, Telos Shmamino. You see three things from Rabbi Chia. You see number one, Shmamino, Rov, Karov, Holach, Achar, Rov. Number one, you see that if you have Rov and Karov, you follow the majority. That's what we're saying over here. That we're saying that you follow the majority, that most of the blood comes from the area of the Makor, and it's Dam Nida. Ushmamino, Ruba, Doraisa. You also see from here that Rov, the concept of Rov is Doraisa, because we're saying you're Chayiv on Bias Mikdash, you're Sorfin all of his Atruma. And also, Shmamino, we also see Isal of Rabbi Zera. We see that what Rabbi Zera said is correct. Amar Rabbi Zera, because Rabbi Zera said, Afal Pisha Dalsus Medina Neulos, that it's true, even though the doors of the province of the Medina are closed. And Rashi explains, Isal of Rabbi Zera, we hold of Rabbi Zera, Damar Gabei Teisha Chanuyos. He says when it comes to the 9 stores, this is when we're trying to determine if a piece of meat is kosher or not. Beshili Parakam and Chsubas, he says at the end of the first parak of Chsubas, Uvenimtza Holach Achar Harov, he says that if you find the piece of meat, you follow majority, you mutter, and therefore if the majority of the stores are selling kosher meat, we say it's mutter. The Aval Pisha Dalsos Medina Neulos, he says even if the doors of the Medina are closed, meaning the Lesa Elachad Ruba, the point over here is you only have one majority lahachshira. You only have one majority to say that it's kosher. Rov ha'ir shetesha chanuya sheba mochros besar shchuta, meaning again you have the majority of this city. 9 of the stores in the city sell kosher meat. V'ha'achas mocheres nevela, one of them sells non-kosher meat. Teika milsa debinan beit harti rube. There are sometimes where you need double rov. Kedamin and hasam, like we say over there. Kagon dalsos medinos psuchos v'rov tabachim sevivos ha-medina Yisrael. You can have a case where the doors of the area are open, so to speak, and most of the butchers who are even in the surrounding areas are Jewish. The Ikal Amezel Basar Trey Ruby, there you'd be following a double majority, Lachshir, in order to say it's Kasha, Rov Ha'ir, V'rov Haboin Michutzala, you would say you have the majority of the city and the majority of those from the outside. And so we're saying that again, according to Rabbi Zera, you don't need that, you don't need a double majority. And we're saying the same is true over here. You see over here the same idea. As the Gemara continues, Do'isha Dechidalsos Medina Neulos Damya, because when it comes to a woman in terms of the Dam Nida, that's the same thing as the doors of the Medina being closed. Nevertheless, we are following majority. And Rashi explains, Doisha Kedalsos Hamadina Neulos Kilomar means to say, the Lekalamemer but Tarti Ruba, you don't have a double majority over here. Elachad Ruba, you have one majority. Sharov Damim Min HaMakor, the majority is that most of the blood, the majority of the blood comes from the Makor, comes from the uterus. Azli Bava Basra Ruba Lahavi Carbon Lazar, and we're saying that you follow that majority even to the extent that you would bring a carbon, Velisrov Truma, even to the extent that you'd burn Truma. Demidi Da'asr La'asos Misafiku, that's not something you would do in a situation of doubt. And so therefore, that's what Rav is saying. You see from Rabbi Chia these 3 ideas. You see Rov of Vikarov Halach Achar Rov. You see that Rov is Doraisa, and you see that's true even when you don't have a double majority, even when you just have a single majority. But the Gemara continues, Va'ravahu Dekamar, but wasn't Rava who just said above, Rov u'motzei lekalaman damar, that this is not just a simple case of Rov, this is a case of Rov and motzei, meaning Rav is saying over here that we can prove from Rabbi Chia. You see from this halacha by Dam Nida that Rov Vikarov Halach Achar Harov. But when Abaya brought the same proof above, Rava said it's not a proof at all, because when it comes to Dam Nida, you have Rov and Motzei. Rava was the one that said Rov and Motzei lekalaman damar. No one would argue in a case of Rov and Motzei, and it's not a proof to what Rabbi Chanina said. And the Gemara says Hadar Bei Rava Me'ahi. Rava actually retracted from that, and Rava really says it is a good proof. The fact that over here we follow the Rov and we don't follow Karov, and we say that it's Dam Nida, that would be the same idea that Rabbi Chanina said, that Rov and Karov we follow the Rov. And the Gemara continues, Itmar, it was stated the following Machlokas Amoroim, Chaviz Shetzafa Benar, if you have a barrel of wine that's found floating in the river, Rav says, Nimtzis Keneged Ir Sharuba Yisrael, if it's found opposite a city that's majority Jewish, mutter, so then the wine is mutter. Keneged Ir Sharuba Nachrim, but if it's found opposite a city that's majority not Jewish, Asira, so then it's Asr, meaning it sounds like Rav is following Karov, whichever is closer. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, Afila Nimtzis Keneged Ir Sharuba Yisrael, even if it's found opposite a city that's majority Jewish, Asira, it's still going to be Asr, because Amor may hide to Kara Asaya, I might say that it came from a place called Kira, meaning to say maybe it came from far away from a non-Jewish area, and essentially Shmuel seems to be saying that we follow majority. And the Gemara says, Lamud bid Rabbi Chanina kamiflagi. So let's say they're arguing exactly about Rabbi Chanina. Demar isled Rabbi Chanina, meaning Shmuel holds like Rabbi Chanina, he follows majority. When you have Rov and Karov, you follow Rov. Umar, let's lay the Rabbi Chanina, and Rav does not hold of Rabbi Chanina. Chanina. He says if it's found by a Jewish city, then we say it's kosher because he's following Karov. He's following what's closer. And the Gemara says, Lo, no, Dekuli Alma Islu de Rabbi Chanina. Could be everybody agrees in general with Rabbi Chanina. We would follow Rov. We would follow the majority. And so why over here does Rav say we follow Karov? We follow the city that the barrel of wine is opposite. Here they're arguing as follows. Demar Savar, because one holds, if it really came from Kira, it would have already sunk. That barrel of wine wouldn't have made it this far because of all of the various currents and bays that it has to go through in the river, so it would never be able to make it from that far away. That's why Rav follows Karov specifically over here. Umar Savar, but the other master says, meaning Shmuel says, that Charifa Denahara Nakat Vasai, it could be that the river was moving quickly and it was able to bring it along even from a far distance. And the Gemara continues, how chatzva de chamer, there was a barrel of wine, the shtakach bepardesa de Arla was found in an orchard of Arla. And so the question is, did it really come from this particular vineyard, in which case it would be Arla, it would be forbidden. So Sharia Ravina said it's permitted. Lema mishum de savar lo de Rabbi Chanina. Let us say that the reason why Ravina said it was permitted was because he holds like Rabbi Chanina, that even though it's Karov, it's close to the Arla, but the majority is not really Arla, so therefore we follow Rov. And the Gemara says, no, it's not necessarily that he follows Rabbi Chanina. It could be Shani Hassam, who was different over there in that case. The Mignav Mina, because let's say it was stolen from somewhere, and the Ganovim, those who stole it, wanted to hide it. Atznui Begavi Lo Mitzni, they wouldn't hide it in the very same place they took it from, and so therefore there's a reason to believe that it came from outside in this particular case. V'hani Mili Chamer, now that's true when it comes to wine. Avol Invi Mitzni, but let's say it was grapes, so then actually they would hide it among the same orchard, among the same vineyard, and then you would maybe say that it came from this particular vineyard. And Rashi explains, if it was stolen from here, they wouldn't hide it here. It's not the way of thieves to hide the wine in the same vineyard they stole it from, because then they're afraid already the people who are treading on the grapes, they might end up finding it. Now that's a concern specifically by wine, but it's not a concern by grapes. By grapes, they would hide it in the same vineyard. And the Gemara continues, there were these jugs of wine that were found among the vines of a Jew, and Sharinu Rava permitted it. And the Gemara says, Leimalo Savar Lola de Rabbi Chanina. Let us say he doesn't hold like Rabbi Chanina. He seems to be following Karov and not Rov. And the Gemara answers, Shani Hassam, it's different over there, Deruba, because the majority. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chav Dalid Amud Beis.